Hi, and welcome back. Now, I'm sorry that I haven't made a video in quite a while, but I've been very busy recently and also had a lot of stressful stuff on, so just haven't had the opportunity to make a video. I have decided though, because when AK gave me a list of topics he'd be interested to hear about, one of the topics he gave on the list was about how New Zealand politics work, because he said he's quite interested in just hearing how politics in different countries work. So I thought today we'd discuss New Zealand politics. Now, I'm going to start by saying that I actually work for the government, and whichever government is elected, I'm working for that government. So I don't belong to any actual party, but whichever party happens to be in power, that's what I work for. So when I say we're going to talk about New Zealand politics, it's more a case of I'm going to explain how New Zealand politics work and things, and how it differs from, say, American politics. I'm not going to get into a discussion as to what way I vote or my own personal political opinions. Okay, it's just going to be quite a this is the way it works type talk. So, New Zealand, we have a Prime Minister and a Deputy Prime Minister rather than, say, a President and a Vice President, and we have elections every 3 years rather than every 4. Now, New Zealand has two main parties, National and Labour. Now, National, I suppose I'd describe them as a party that sort of leans towards the right, and Labour would be the party that leans towards the left. Having said that, both of them are really quite close to centre, so unlike in America, there's not a huge difference in their policies. You know, there are some slight differences, but when I say they're right-leaning and left-leaning, I don't mean to the same degree as, say, the two major parties in America are. It's nowhere near that big a difference. So certainly, I've seen some YouTube videos recently about American elections and things like that, and some of the things that have been going down, you know, people suggesting that you should leave your spouse if they vote differently from how you do. Well, I can tell you right now, in New Zealand, no one would ever leave their spouse just for voting for a different party than what they might have voted for themselves, because as I said, there's not that big a divide between the two here in New Zealand. There's also at least 4, and I say at least because it does vary a wee bit each election, but there's at least 4 minor parties. So there's ACT, there's New Zealand First, there's the Maori Party, and there's the Green Party. Now, the way it works in New Zealand, so the two major parties, Labour and National, one of those two parties is always going to win the election, so it's going to be one of those two parties that have the Prime Minister and that will lead the country for the next 3 years. However, they're unlikely to actually get a majority to be able to rule on their own. So what ends up happening is they have to make agreements with a couple of the minor parties, so you actually have like 2 or 3 different parties that are between them forming a government. You don't get just one party on its own that can form a government. It could happen, and it did happen, not at the last elections but the one before that, but it's unlikely to happen. So normally you'd have either National or Labour in power, but they would be in a coalition government with one or two of the minor parties. So the one difference between New Zealand politics and American politics, which isn't much of a difference, but as I said, National is the right-leaning party of the two, and their colour is blue, and Labour, who is the left-leaning party of the two, their colour is red, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's the opposite of America, where the party that's red is the right-leaning party and the party that's blue is the left-leaning party. So yeah, it's the opposite here. But as I said, the parties really, they just do not have that same the same differences that you get in America. In fact, one thing about Kiwis, I must say, is that my observations of Americans, this isn't an insult in any way, so please don't take it as an insult, but Americans seem to be, they're quite outspoken about what they believe in, like their religious beliefs and their political beliefs. They'll just say exactly what they think, and if someone takes offence, then it's too bad. In New Zealand, generally speaking, one of the things that Kiwis are known for is not wanting to offend people. So, on the whole, you don't really talk about politics in New Zealand. You also don't really talk about, oh, look at this tiny spot there. You don't talk about religion in New Zealand. So unless unless you're actually getting into a debate about that, or you know that someone is going to share the same views as you share, if you're meeting someone new, you didn't really know anything about their own personal convictions or anything, you wouldn't generally discuss politics or religion or anything like that with them that might offend someone, just because Kiwis don't want to offend people. They'd rather just, play it safe. So currently in New Zealand, the current government is the national government, and they're in a coalition with New Zealand First and with ACT. So the three parties between them are ruling, and the way it's working is that the leader of the National Party is our current Prime Minister, and the leader of New Zealand First and ACT are both going to be Deputy Prime Minister for half the 3-year term each. So we'll actually be changing Deputy Prime Minister a year and a half into the 3-year term this time. That wouldn't always work that way. That wouldn't always be the case. It just happens to be the case this time. So I'm not sure what else you'd really like to know. Oh, the other thing is we don't have like electoral seats, so every vote has the same value to it, I suppose you could say. Although when you do vote in New Zealand, you actually get 2 votes. So you cast one vote for who you want to be the Prime Minister. You cast another vote for who you want to be the representative for the area that you live in. So in theory you could have, say for example right now National is the governing party, you could have a national-led government, but you could have some Labour Party representatives taking up some of the seats in Parliament still, because where they got more votes than National did for certain areas. And like in America, we have different states, sort of blue states or red states. Here in New Zealand, there are some areas that are more likely to vote Labour and are fairly safe Labour seats, I suppose, and some areas that are more likely to vote National and are fairly safe National seats. And you've got some that are like swing areas, so kind of how you have swing states in America that can change from election to election and things. So in a lot of ways it is similar to American politics in that respect, I suppose. But yes, there are a lot of differences, and one of the major differences, I suppose, is in New Zealand, regardless of which party gets in, every single New Zealander is going to accept that that's my new Prime Minister, that's the party that got the most votes, or that was able to form a coalition government, so that's the Prime Minister and I'll do what I'm told. Whereas if YouTube is anything to go by, in America there might be some people that say, well, regardless of who got in, well, I didn't vote for them and they're not my president. You just wouldn't get that in New Zealand. I must say, in actual fact, in my opinion, having the internet come to New Zealand, quite some time ago, was in some ways actually the worst thing that ever happened to this country, I think. Simply because we're so far away from everywhere in terms of physical distance, and before the invention of the internet, news took quite some time to travel here, and so you didn't quite get the same level of world news as you now get. And just as, so for example, let's give an example, okay? In America, there are some people that believe that reparations should be paid. to the African Americans. Well, we have, I suppose Maoris are like our version of the African Americans, I suppose, the native people of New Zealand, and we can talk about that some more in a different video. And there would be some people that believe now that reparations should be paid to the Maoris, and I think the reason that people think these things is because they hear about what's going on in the rest of the world now, and it does affect people, and people let things be swayed by what's going on elsewhere in the world, whereas before the invention of the internet we were protected, I suppose, from a lot of that sort of thing. So just people didn't have very divisive opinions or anything like that before the internet came along. So in some ways, and I know I sound like an old fogey when I say this, but yeah, in some ways I think the internet coming to New Zealand was one of the worst things that ever happened to the country. Having said that, I mean, I'm still young enough to use the internet for all sorts of things, so, and I do love having the internet, so I'm not suggesting that we should actually go back to a pre-internet day. In fact, I don't think as a country you could survive like that. You couldn't have international trade and things like that really without internet nowadays. So that was sort of the main points I wanted to make about how New Zealand is governed and how the government works in New Zealand. And as I said, I was keeping my own personal opinions and thoughts out of the video altogether. I just think it's the wisest course of action. Some of my friends might know what way I lean and what I think and things, but that's a private thing, not a put it out on a YouTube video type thing. Now I'm going to, I'll just probably do 2 more rows just get us over near the Vegemart, the veggie stall there, and then I will show you something else on my farm, which is something that won't be totally expected by everybody. I will also add, while I'm thinking about it, you'll notice that we're on my FS22 farm here. Now, yes, I did pre-order FS25, and yes, I downloaded it yesterday when it was released. Now, funnily enough, because we're so many hours ahead of most of the world here in New Zealand, release day for FS25 in New Zealand was not the 12th of November like it was elsewhere in the world. Our release day was the 13th of November. And the reason for that change, the reason that release day for us was 13th of November, is otherwise we basically would have got the game a day before the rest of the world, and we'd have people playing it online a day beforehand, and I suppose that would cause a lot of problems if people were seen playing online with us or recording videos on it or anything. Anyway, the reason I'm still playing FS22 here, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, in the 2 fields over there on the other side of the road, behind AK's house and behind Fury Machine Gaming's house, I have corn growing, and I've been really looking forward to harvesting that corn, so I don't want to miss out on doing the harvest because of FS25. But also, I've got to admit, I loaded up FS25 and just had a wee bit of a play around on it last night offline, and there's a lot of things that I'm sure are going to be good because there'll be mods to improve things, but for right now, when there's almost no mods out for the game, I would have to say that the game is sorely lacking in a lot of areas compared to what I would like, and I was expecting that, to be perfectly honest. FS22 here was also sorely lacking in a lot of areas before the right mods came along to make it the game it is today. But because of this, it's my intention to not move on to FS25 just yet. Now, for people that are friends with me on Steam, they may see me playing it another time or two just to try out different features and ideas and things, but as a general thing, I won't be recording any videos on FS25 yet, and I'll certainly be playing FS22 a lot more than I'll be playing FS25 for the time being, because until some of those mods come out, I think I would enjoy FS22 a lot more. Now, as an example, okay, I know there is a very old Massey Ferguson Combine Harvester in FS22, 25, sorry. I also know there's a old International pickup truck, but there's no old tractors, not a single one that I can see. There wasn't even the Fiat Agri that came out in that DLC pack by Giants for FS22 here. I expect at the very least that Fiat Agri would be in FS25, and it's not yet. So there's no old tractors. There's obviously no English, Irish or Scottish farms yet. So really what I'm kind of waiting on is I'd like to see probably a Land Rover would be good. An old Land Rover would be excellent. I'd like to see some old tractors, either Fiat Agris or Fords, maybe a David Brown, something like that. And I'd like to see a farm that's either English, Irish or Scottish, a decent map out, before I'm really going to start playing FS25 with any earnest. But I have got it. But yeah, my next few videos, certainly for the next month or two, any videos I release in the next month or two will probably still be FS22, and that explains why. Now I'm going to go and show you something that's new on my farm and you wouldn't have seen on my farm. Now this is going to seem quite strange to you, because I've always made a point of pointing out this farm is set in the 80s. So anything that's not in the 80s is very, very out of place. And yet up here we have the latest addition to my farm, which is the Mazda MX-5 in bright red, or Mazda Miata. I think they might call it Miata MX-5 in the States. And this is certainly not from the 1980s, this one, but it's of my farm, and I will show you why. Let's just take it for a quick spin first. So, as you can see, it sounds quite fantastic. I'm just going to shut up for a second so you can hear the engine of it. So, I'll get it out onto the main road a bit and then let it rev, I think. Ooh. Okay. Okay. So the reason why I've put this on my farm, even though it's not from the 1980s, we'll just pull over here for a second so I can show you, is that I have finally convinced my wife, after a very long time of trying, to let me buy one of these in real life. So if I go, let's have a look, where do I want to go to get out of the game for a second? It's that one, I think, isn't it? Yep, Task Manager. That's what I wanted. If I go out of here and go to the, I'll just close that, so I'm going to go back into the game in a second, and we'll go into the photos, pictures. Well, this is what I have just bought for myself. If it loads, here it comes. So this is a Mazda MX-5, the same model as what I've now got in the game there. So I haven't actually picked it up yet. This car's quite a few hours away from where I live, and it's way out in the middle of the wop, so you can't get there, you can't fly there, you can't catch a bus there. So I've got to drive to go and pick it up, and of course because it's too far to drive there and back in a day, so my wife and I are going away, not this coming weekend, the one following that, to go and pick this car up, and we'll bring this car and her car back home again. But that's my new car that I've just bought, and that's why on my farm here I now have one of those cars in the same colour. Now, an interesting thing, I've got a wee bit of funny stories to tell you about that actually, so shouldn't use my mirrors. And the other thing with this one is that interior there, if I get out of the tree, is actually very, very lifelike to exactly what the real interior looks like. Having said that, my one is of course right-hand drive and not left-hand drive. Okay, but otherwise, you know, the steering wheel's the same, the instrument cluster's the same, the centre console's the same, even the door's the same. Mine doesn't have that orange roll bar because I've got the proper roll bars behind the seats of mine, but it is very, very close to You know, it is the same model as what my real one is. But anyway, I was going to say, so when I talked to my wife, try and convince her, because I've got 4 children and 3 of them have now left home. And so a good friend of mine pointed out to me, he knew that I'd liked these for many, many years, and he said, Russell, you really should buy it now rather than leaving it any longer. And the reason for that is because they are very low to the ground, and if you leave it for another decade before you buy it, then you might not actually be able to get in and out of it. You might find it too low. So if you leave it too much longer, you may not ever get to own one. And I thought, well, that's actually a really, really good point. So, and in terms of value, they're not expensive because they're not modern. I mean, it's 2006, my one. So they're not expensive. It's actually worth less money than the car I sold to be able to buy this one. But they are very low to the ground and things, so he had a good point. But when I suggested to my wife that now might be the time for me to buy a sports car like this, she mentioned the words midlife crisis. Yeah, that's funny, because only a woman will ever accuse a man of going through a midlife crisis. And the reason I believe that is the case is this. Okay, there's 4 things that all men in life like at least one of these 4, possibly more than one of these 4. Men like hot rods, and or American muscle cars, and or sports cars, and or motorcycles. I think all men love at least one of those 4 things, possibly more than one. The problem is that when a man gets married and starts a family, all 4 of those things are quite impractical. I'm not sure how impractical an American muscle car would be if you are American, but even then, probably the age of them and maybe the value of them would still make them quite impractical. So when a man gets married and starts a family, he gets rid of any dreams like that and he puts them on ice and forgets about them. But when his children have all left home, in this case all my children bar one have now left home, so he sort of thinks, well, now's the time for me to realise those dreams before I get too old to enjoy them. So a man thinks of it as perfect timing, now I can realise my dreams. A woman thinks of that as midlife crisis. Yeah? But anyway, I was talking to a couple of people at work about how my wife had suggested I was going through a midlife crisis, and it started a conversation about all the things that you'll never ever hear a man say. Okay? So we started thinking of all these things. So the obvious one is, not tonight dear, I've got a headache. But then we started getting more inventive, and I came up with one that I thought was quite good, which was, I can't decide between the teal and the turquoise. Now that is not something you'll ever hear a man say, okay? Partly because men don't care enough about colours, and in fact don't even have that many colours. So I believe women have a bigger colour spectrum than men do, and that's why men don't have any fashion sense, because they don't have enough colours. I mean, even when it comes to blue, most men recognise there are 2 different shades of blue. There's light blue and dark blue, and that's it. You know, there's no such thing as sky blue or duck egg blue or anything like that. That's just made up rubbish that women make up. You know, men will recognise 2 different shades of blue and that's it. Another thing that you will never ever hear a man say is, I think we need more cushions for the bed, darling. Said no man ever. Okay. Another one, we've been dating for quite some time. Maybe we should start thinking about getting engaged. Yeah. So yeah, we came up with all these really, really funny sayings of things that you only ever hear a woman say, and that was started because of my wife suggesting to me that I was having a midlife crisis. I mean, to me, it's just opportunity knocks. So I'm going to call that it for my video. Hope you all had a good time, and I'll get back to my windrowing again with the Ford tractor there, and I'll talk to you all again later. Bye.